The gavel's crack echoed through the stifling air of the Harlan County Courthouse like a thunderclap muffled by the relentless humidity that clung to everything in this forgotten corner of the South, the wooden panels along the walls absorbing the sound before it could fully resonate, leaving only a hollow ring that settled over the sparse crowd like an unspoken verdict already cast in the shadows of prejudice and procedure, a ring that seemed to vibrate in Zara Ellis's chest as she shuffled into the defendant's box under the weight of a gaze that pinned her like a fragile specimen under the unyielding glass of judgment. Barely 14, with her braids tied back in a practical ponytail that spoke of mornings spent rallying neighbors for community cleanups rather than fussing over mirrors, Zara's oversized denim jacket, patched at the elbows from countless washes in a home where every stitch told a story of making do, hung loose on her slender frame, the fabric carrying the faint, comforting scent of lavender soap her aunt used to chase away the day's dust and doubts, a scent that now mingled uneasily with the courtroom's pervasive aroma of stale coffee seeping from the adjacent clerk's office and the deeper, mustier undertone of unresolved grievances, those quiet injustices that festered in small towns where justice was portioned out not in grand proclamations but in measured whispers behind closed doors and faded ledgers. Her sneakers, scuffed from pedaling her bike through cracked sidewalks to chase down stories for the makeshift community newsletter she pieced together on her bedroom laptop, squeaked faintly against the worn linoleum floor as she took her seat, the sound swallowed by the room's oppressive silence. Her dark eyes scanning the assembly, not with the wide-eyed fear of a child thrust into adult machinations, but with the sharp, assessing clarity of someone who had learned, far too young. That observation was her most reliable shield in a world quick to label and dismiss. The gallery, a patchwork of locals in threadbare flannel shirts rolled to elbows tanned by fieldwork and Sunday dresses repurposed for weekday errands, leaned forward in their scarred oak benches, a motley assembly of farmers with calloused hands twisting sweat-stained caps in their laps, a lone schoolteacher dabbing at her brow with a lace-trimmed handkerchief that fluttered like a white flag of uneasy neutrality, and a knot of retirees whose low murmurs formed a constant undercurrent of preconceived consensus, their eyes appraising Zara with that familiar blend of idle curiosity and veiled condemnation reserved for those who dared to disrupt the town's carefully maintained rhythm of acceptance and avoidance, though Zara had woven herself into the very fabric of this place since toddlerhood, her block parties drawing folks from 3 streets over with pots of greens and cornbread, her free lunch drives at the rec center a lifeline for families scraping by on promises that rarely paid out. She remembered the incident with the unblinking clarity that etches trauma into the soul like acid-etching metal, the kind of memory that replayed in quiet moments with the insistence of a looped reel. Deacon Elias Grant, a stooped septuagenarian with a worn Bible perpetually tucked under one arm like an extension of his gentle spirit, and a smile that could coax sunlight from storm clouds, pulled over on Elm Street for a taillight that flickered more from the cruel march of years than any willful defiance, his old sedan wheezing to a halt under the pulsing blue and red lights of Officer Harlan Tate's cruiser that throbbed like an erratic heartbeat against the twilight. Zara had been biking home from the library, her backpack bulging with dog-eared volumes on civil rights icons, whose stories she devoured like maps to uncharted freedoms, when she crested the hill and spotted the tableau unfolding under the sodium glow of street lamps just flickering to life. Deacon Grant's hands visible on the steering wheel in that deliberate, palms-up gesture of compliance drilled into generations as survival shorthand, his voice, a steady basso rumble, explaining his haste to the soup kitchen where pots simmered with hope for the hungry. But Tate's stance screamed escalation from the outset, boots planted wide as unyielding roots, meaty hand hovering near his holster as if the deacon's words were live wires rather than humble entreaties, the air thickening with that electric prelude to violence that Zara had sensed in too many neighborhood whispers about routine stops gone sideways. Then the shove, Tate's open palm slamming into Grant's chest with the finality of a door bolted shut, propelling the old man backward in a graceless arc that ended with his frail frame crumpling against the curb, his Bible skittering across the asphalt into a puddle that reflected the cruiser's lights like shattered stained glass, pages fluttering open to passages of mercy now muddied and torn. Zara's phone was in her hand before conscious thought could catch up, the record button depressed with fingers that trembled not from terror but from the urgent knowledge that words evaporated in such moments, while pixels preserved, capturing the deacon's sharp intake of breath, the dull thud of his head meeting concrete with a sound like a dropped melon splitting, and Tate's immediate bellow of resisting. that echoed hollow even to her adolescent ears, a scripted line from the playbook of plausible deniability. She hadn't yelled or rushed forward, instinct honed from Auntie's late-night talks about staying safe by staying seen but not entangled. She had documented. The video, a mute sentinel that, when uploaded later to the community forum she'd bootstrapped with free WordPress, ignited a digital bonfire of shares and pleas for accountability, only to be doused by the bureaucratic deluge of charges. Zara hit with obstruction of official duties and public disturbance, her age no bulwark against the full arsenal of Voss's office, which moved with the inexorable grind of a millstone fashioned to pulverize the small and outspoken. Now, in this chamber where the ancient air conditioner wheezed asthmatic protests against the heat pressing in from outside, Voss paced before the elevated bench with the predatory prowl of a man who had never tasted defeat in these parts, his loafers clicking a metronomic tattoo of accusation against the floor, his tie a crimson silk constrictor around his neck knotted tight as his narrative, launching into his opening salvo with the zealous cadence of a tent revivalist peddling absolution to the unconvinced. Your Honor, the state stands ready to illustrate that Miss Ellis, in flagrant defiance of civic decorum, interjected herself into a lawful enforcement action, transforming a standard compliance verification into a maelstrom of misinformation and hazard, imperiling not only the officers entrusted with our safety but the very fabric of communal harmony. Her conduct was no act of civic vigilance but a calculated incitement, preserved on her personal recording apparatus and propagated across digital channels to foment discord and undermine the pillars of public trust. The phrasing slithered through the space like oil on water, each clause crafted to recast Zara not as a girl with a smartphone but as an existential peril, a catalyst for chaos in a system that thrived on the docility of its youth, particularly those whose presence evoked historical specters best kept hooded in the attic of collective amnesia, the retirees in the back row nodding in solemn accord, as if Voss channeled their own unspoken catechisms of order over inquiry, the schoolteacher averting her gaze to her lap, where her handkerchief twisted into knots of discomfort, the farmer beside her muttering under his breath about kids stirring pots they can't stir right. Zara held her posture rigid, fingers interlaced on the scarred oak railing that fronted the box, knuckles blanching under the strain of restraint, but her chin inched upward just enough to broadcast that she was here, fully present and unbroken, her mind a whirlwind replaying the deacon's tumble, the way his glasses had skittered across the pavement in glinting shards like accusations flung at indifferent stars, the bystander's frozen tableau of averted eyes and half-hearted steps forward that dissolved into inaction. Her court-appointed advocate, Theo Lang, a beleaguered junior from the public defender's mill where caseloads piled like unsorted laundry, shifted uncomfortably beside her, his rumpled suit jacket bearing the faint creases of a night spent poring over precedents in a fluorescent-lit motel, his beard unkempt and eyes shadowed from the grind of juggling 10 cases on fumes and fiat. He leaned in close, his breath carrying the minty tang of a recent lozenge, meant to mask the coffee that fueled his all-nighters, whispering with the urgency of a man rationing hope, "Stick to the sequence when it's your moment, no flourishes, no opinions, just the timeline as it unfolded." But Zara only dipped her head in acknowledgement, her thoughts anchored to the deacon's labored breaths in the aftermath, the way he'd clutched his side not from pain alone but from the indignity of it all, a lifetime of deference repaid with dismissal. The judge, Elias Thorne, cleared his throat with a rumble that vibrated through his mustache like distant thunder trapped in brambles, signaling Voss to summon his inaugural witness, and the heavy oak doors at the chamber's rear groaned open on hinges protesting neglect, admitting Harlan Tate with the unhurried swagger of a sovereign reclaiming his throne. Tate, in his mid-40s with a buzz, cut silvering at the temples like frost on barbed wire, and a uniform starched to the point of creaking, advanced to the stand with the assurance of one who had patrolled these halls as much as the streets beyond, his eyes pale blue and unblinking as a snake's locking onto Zara's with the hungry gleam of reprisal deferred, a smirk ghosting his lips chapped from endless field debriefs under merciless suns. Sworn in with the rote efficiency of a conveyor belt stamping parts, he dove into his recital under Voss's solicitous prompts, sketching the stop as paragons of protocol, Grant's mild remonstrance ballooning into non-compliance under Tate's narrative alchemy, and Zara's recording an aggressive intrusion necessitating her swift apprehension to restore order. The young lady was hollering, pulling in onlookers like flies to mess, had to contain the situation for the good of all involved. Tate intoned, his baritone booming to fill the corners. Broad hands gesturing in broad strokes as if conjuring the pandemonium solely from his imagination, the gallery lapping it up like communion wine, the farmer's mutter evolving into a full-throated darn right, the retirees trading nods that knit a quilt of communal absolution where badge equaled benevolence and query equaled quarrel. Theo interposed objections at intervals, his voice a tentative thread. Objection, characterization, but Thorne overruled with a dismissive flick of his wrist, the mustache quivering in perfunctory annoyance, the trial's cadence, a familiar furrow plowed deep by favoritism's steady hand. Zara's summons to the stand arrived like a squall line advancing without herald, Voss orbiting her perch with the circling menace of a raptor scenting vulnerability, his queries dripping with patronizing silk. Miss Ellis, you concede to capturing imagery sans authorization amid a volatile exchange. Why not summon assistance rather than assuming the role of impromptu chronicler? Zara's reply emerged, tempered, her timbre even as a metronome despite the coil tightening in her gut. Assistance came after, sir, but eyes needed opening first. Talk twists easy, but what the lens holds stays straight. The gallery undulated, a wave of disquiet creasing brows, but Voss bore down. And upon broadcasting it across the ether, did the potential detriment to Officer Tate's standing factor into your calculus? Zara held his stare, unflagging. Detriment? The deacon's crown met pavement, that's detriment. A recording merely mirrors the moment. Murmurs crested, the schoolteacher edging forward in her seat, but Thorne's gavel quelled the tide, his edict occurred. Sustained to Voss's ensuing demurral, the equilibrium skewed prior to Parity's plea. As Voss conceded the floor, Tate dismounted the stand with theatrical panache, his trajectory veering proximate to Zara's enclosure, near enough for the acrid bite of his aftershave pined sharp as solvent to assail her senses. He lingered, feigning a belt cinch, but his murmur wormed across the gulf, sibilant and venom-laced. Figure a snip, it shifts the board. Do you miss? Press on, discover the drop. The taunt lingered like acrid haze, Zara's mandible firming, yet ere retort could form, Tate's palm whipped forth a resounding cuff that met her cheek in a report akin to a starter's bang, her skull jerking lateral, the blaze igniting swift and fierce, a rivulet of warmth tracing from her lacerated lip to stain her chin. The chamber ossified, inhalation suspended in communal stupor, the farmers aside perishing unborn, the schoolteacher's palm clapping to lips in horror, Thorne's gavel suspended inert as if etiquette had sublimed in the blink. Tate recomposed, visage a veneer of artifice astonishment. She advanced involuntary counter, yet the fabrication flagged beneath the throng's scrutiny, Voss faltering amid nascent remonstrances while Theo vaulted erect, stool capsizing in clamor. Zara daubed her lip, digits emerging glossed, yet her gaze, those indomitable, unquenched orbs, transfixed Tate's, timbre surfacing crystalline and chill notwithstanding the pulsation that held no reflex. That was your wager, no vigil endures. The declaration rippled like seismic afterwaves, the chamber exhaling in splintered susurrations, Thorne at length hammering his mallet to intermission, countenance ruddy beneath the whisker fringe. Yet Zara endured, ensconced, mandible elevated, the sanguine token a talisman over tarnish, her cogitations veering forthwith to the solitary confederate uninvoked, the matriarch whose void had loomed lengthier than reminiscence, whose re-emergence would eclipse the firmament. The fluorescent hum in the courthouse basement archives buzzed like a swarm of dormant secrets awakened by the faint stir of intrusion, the air thick with the papery scent of yellowed files stacked in towering metal shelves that leaned like weary sentinels under the burden of forgotten grievances and half-buried scandals, dust motes swirling lazily in the narrow slivers of light that pierced through the high, barred windows overlooking the loading dock where delivery trucks idled with the indifferent rumble of engines tuned to monotony, their exhaust fumes seeping faintly through cracks in the concrete like whispers of the world above that rarely descended to this subterranean vault of bureaucratic limbo. Riley Kane navigated the labyrinthine aisles with the spectral precision of an operative who had traversed far more treacherous mazes, clandestine dead drops in rain-slicked European alleys under the cover of midnight fog, encrypted vaults buried deep in Langley's sublevels, where the air hummed with the constant whir of cooling fans guarding terabytes of shadows. But here, in this dimly lit crypt of county caseloads, her low-heeled boots whispered against the scuffed linoleum without a betraying echo, her nondescript pantsuit in muted navy wool, blending her silhouette into the gloom as effectively as any adaptive camouflage she deployed in field trials, the fabric chosen not for fashion but for its unremarkable texture that deflected second glances from the occasional clerk shuffling past with a card of returns. At 42, with fine lines feathering the corners of her hazel eyes from endless hours squinting at grainy satellite feeds and redacted briefings, and her auburn hair cropped in a practical bob that framed her face like a no-nonsense frame around a portrait of calculated resolve, Riley embodied the agency's unspoken creed. Presence as ripple, not wave, her movements economical. Her gaze a scalpel dissecting the mundane for the telling anomaly. She hadn't laid eyes on Zara in 7 long years. Not since the ink dried on the divorce decree and the non-disclosure clauses clamped shut like vault doors on their fractured history, a necessary severance to shield her daughter from the agency's gravitational pull that had already claimed too many collaterals in Riley's ops ledger. But the encrypted alert from a embedded contact in county social services, assets offspring entangled, footage circulating, brass mobilizing suppression had yanked her from a mid-morning debrief on Baltic cyber intrusions, her unmarked SUV devouring the interstate's gray ribbon in a haze of high-speed focus, and the gnawing regret that had simmered low since that last supervised visit, Zara's small hand slipping from hers as the caseworker led her away with a clipboard checklist of stable environments. Now, in this underbelly where case files slumbered in alphabetical purgatory, their spines cracked like ancient tomes whispering indictments to no one, Riley's gloved fingers, thin latex snapping softly with each flex, traced the warped edge of a binder labeled Tate H. Incident reports 2018. Present. The cardboard buckled from persistent dampness that seeped through the foundation like the town's unspoken resentments, its contents fanning open under the harsh green shade of a desk lamp that cast elongated shadows like accusatory fingers across the scarred reading table. Pages rustled under her scrutiny, each entry a thread in a noose of her own weaving. Complaint after complaint, from loitering checks devolving into contested grapples that left complainants with sprained wrists and failure to comply citations, bar altercations where Tate's containment holds resulted in cracked ribs dismissed as pre-existing conditions, and 2 custody notations terminating in unforeseen medical events that in-house coroners had stamped natural despite marginalia in autopsy prelims, hinting at petechial hemorrhages and restraint artifacts scrubbed in final drafts. Riley's mandible firmed, her analytical mind cross-threading these fragments with classified dossiers. She'd greenlit off-books, echoes of enthusiastic enforcement profiles in Harlan County mirroring hybrid ops. She'd audited in Sunbelt, outposts, where municipal badges moonlighted as enforcers for low-level syndicates, seeding contraband to inflate arrests and muzzle informants with veiled threats or accidental discharges. Tate wasn't operating solo. He was a piston in an apparatus oiled by Voss's prosecutorial discretion. Harlow's clerical prestidigitation rerouting files into digital voids, the deacon's shove merely the visible bruise on a body politic riddled with contusions long normalized as friction. A distant floorboard groaned under shifting weight, and Riley's palm ghosted to the concealed holster at her waistband. A compact Beretta chambered and cool against her skin, but the disturbance resolved into the archivist, a stooped septuagenarian in cat-eye glasses fogged from the chill named Mabel, maneuvering a rattling cart of recirculations, her voice a conspiratorial undertow pitched low as she paused abreast. Federal eyes. I'd wager? Tate's got pull up top best not tarry. Shadows stretch long in these parts. Riley's response curved her lips in a smile that chilled rather than warmed, her digits deftly palming a micro SD adapter into the binder's rear flap for later forensic harvest. Noted, Mabel appreciate the lay of the land. Pull like that tends to snag on its own thorns in due season. She commandeered a dolly of her own, its wheels squealing faintly as she loaded a selective trove. Tate's performance evos laundered to laurels, Harlow's relocation chronologies dovetailing with grievance surges, and a manila envelope from Grant's clinical dossier, its flap sealed with brittle tape that yielded to her thumbnail, revealing a chronology of contusions flaring post-compliance consultations. Ascending in the groaning elevator that reeked of motor oil and mildewed carpet, Riley's focus honed to the hallway forking toward juvenile proceedings, where Theo Lang paced a rut in the threadbare runner, his phone fused to his ear, timbre a frantic susurrus pleading for continuances or character witnesses. She intercepted him at the water cooler, her advance as noiseless as vapor. Mr. Lang. Riley Kane Zara's next of kin. Debrief. Theo jolted, a splash of tepid water arcing from his paper cone, his gaze ballooning at the matte black credential. She flashed eagle subdued for stateside subtlety before the post-recess debacle poured forth in a torrent. Tate's cuff rationalized as spontaneous reflex. Zara's laceration swabbed by a nurse who clucked youthful exuberance while jotting minimal notes, Voss's bid to quash her recording as circumstantial hearsay rubber-stamped pending technical review. Riley's countenance held neutral as glacial ice, yet her synapses fired volleys. The strike wasn't caprice, it was communique. Tate's crude semaphore to intimidate a recorder whose bytes had already tripped her perimeter alerts from a Tor-routed scrub attempt. Procure Tate's unexpurgated psychological dossier backchannels if the front's barred, and activate interim safeguarding for Zara before Vespers. Theo bobbed assent, fumbling for his fob, but Riley was in motion, her device quivering with a Langley cipher. Kane tail confirmed on your perimeter. Trio Lovis, vectoring your locus. Evac stat. The heat was cresting as she ghosted into the subterranean garage where pillars loomed like concrete sentinels under sodium halos. A obsidian sedan idled at the egress ramp, its polarized panes mirroring her trajectory like twin voids. She arced wide, ducking a stanchion to Edgeplate's government surplus, cycled last quarter before evaporating into the crepuscular haze, her SUV's V8 awakening with a predatory purr as she shadowed at standoff distance, the pursuit a preliminary pas de deux to the symphony of subversion. Her bolt hole, a nondescript rancher straddling the county frontier with blinds drawn taut as drumskins and larder stocked with vacuum-sealed rations in tactical crates, thrummed with the low susurrus of a dehumidifier battling the damp when Riley offloaded the dolly onto a scarred trestle table etched from field improvisations, her ultrabook unfurling a mosaic of panes. Biometric scan on Tate yielding a 2012 Tavern Melee expunged from civic annals, Harlow's professional veneer fracturing beneath queries to a phantom LLC sluicing advisory retainers into Voss's electoral war chest. Zara's raw capture, relayed via Theo's desperate dispatch, cycled in perpetual. Grant's stagger, Tate's swerve, the spectator's petrified vignette, a diorama of acquiescence that Riley catalogued from briefs on analogous precincts, where solitary thrusts cascaded into muted lineages and interred inquiries. A rap 3 measured taps shattered the concentration, and Riley's palm sought the Beretta beneath the planking, but the fisheye lens framed Zara, parka cinched to chin, labium tumefied like a plum kissed by frost, Theo dithering like a fretful duenna in her wake. She demanded ingress, he shrugged, and Zara surged past, her satchel thudding to the planking, optics latching onto Riley with a cocktail of circumspection and conflagration. You evaporated when I was 7. Materializing for a vignette? Serendipitous. The barb struck keen, Riley stowing the sidearm, her riposte equilibrated. Serendipity suits sightseers. Sprout. I absented to quarantine you from webs like this. Tate's not coughing for insolence, he's panicking because that bite implicates him in deeper currents. Zara's derision huffed, collapsing into a stool that groaned beneath her slightness, extricating her slate from the rucksack to invoke the pristine footage. Unaltered, chronometer harmonized to Tate's patrol ledger. Deeper currents like Harlow, who reallocates dossiers to Nirvana. I forged the plaza's auxiliary node sloppy craftsmanship, but it adhered. Riley's arc elevated, veiling approbation. The juvenile had assimilated her flair for virtual pilferage, verily. As they calibrated intelligence, Zara's bulletin board broadcasts summoning veiled informants, Riley's overtures flagging Harlow's extraterritorial repositories, the sanctuary pulsed with tenuous concord, Grant's wheezed inhalations from the segment accentuating their covenant. Nocturne deepened, precipitation drumming the corrugated roof like impatient digits, when Riley's fortified conduit warbled, Kane intercept on your appendage, triad inconspicuous, converging your azimuth, vacate forthwith. Zara's optics dilated, yet Riley mobilized, seizing egress packs from the armoire necessities compacted in ebony ballistic weave, her timbre serene as she lobbed Zara a plate carrier, don the rig, slate to dormant. We're phantoms this eve. The sedan from the subterranean materialized in the reflector as they detonated from the drive, aggregate spewing beneath radials. Riley's stratagems, a seminar in circumvention ruses through subsidiary byways, a pyrotechnic decoy to baffle transponders until they forsook the conveyance in a maze thicket, trekking to a reserve chariot beneath starless vault. Zara huffed adjacent in the declivity, mire encrusting her treads, yet her clasp on the slate was adamant. They'll unearth us anon. Riley's chortle grated low, barbed. That's the gambit, they hound phantasms. We assail the font. Aurora's luminescence intensified, oriating the granary's rafters as Theo's ciphered conveyance chimed. VFW purged. Harlow convening ADST orientation at the Enclave extracurricular, habitual cadre. Riley's cartography unfurled, fasteners denoting the Enclave's vulnerabilities. Zara's unmanned aerial specs synchronizing to a belligerent superimposition. We ethereal ingress, emplace listeners. Disengage antecedent to repast throng. The Enclave, a faux pastoral expanse of timber girders and masonry mantles aping patrician respite, hunkered on escarpments dominating the fluvial bend, its lot speckled with municipal numerals at this juncture, the ether crisp with resinous pitch and the vestigial scorch of preceding pyre. Riley and Zara advanced from the utilitarian path. Riley's apparatus, a portmanteau of gelatinous discs and filament optics. Zara's rucksack retrofitted with an ad hoc suppressor to baffle boundary lenses. They infiltrated the boscage like specters, Zara's treads mute on coniferous detritus, her respiration equilibrated despite the coronal throb at her brows. This transcended gazette dispatches or velocipede pursuits. This was the precipice where Riley's realm hemorrhaged tangible. Within the utilitarian scullery, vapor ascending from colossal cauldrons as preparers essayed fritters. They spectralized conduits, Riley affixing gelatin auditors to ducting with molecular cement, Zara insinuating filament sondes through lattices to eavesdrop the contiguous colloquium annex. Resonance burgeoned in their auditory implants. Harlow's adenoidal inflection, Juvenile's vignette is erratic, propel the adulterated thesis. Tate, incline upon Grant's therapeutics, fabricate the tumble as disequilibrium. Voss's cachinnation, oleaginous as lubricant, DOJ's nosing. Disseminate the sprout's adolescent docket pilferage at 12, renders her dubious. Tate's guttural, commenced her kinswoman's amenable to visitation. Zara's digits bold. The deacon's convulsion from her vignette reverberating in recollection, yet Riley's palm on her scapula anchored. Inhale we troll them languid. Disengagement was canonical, evanescing the scullery amid resonant platters, the fluvial path engulfing their recession until Tate's patrol materialized at the pathhead, barricading like a levee, his contour expansive against Aurora's luminescence, transceiver crackling evocations. Emerge from the undergrowth, forthwith extremities elevated. Riley immobilized Zara with a optic, her timbre a silken edict, persist. Prior to materializing, extremities manifest, operative cane, sovereign bailiwick retract. Tate's guffaw bayed, palm spasming toward his flank holster. Bailiwick? This domain is mine. Dame recede or consort the juvenile in confinement. The impasse elongated taut as catgut, Zara's suppressor throbbing dissonance on Tate's transceiver, interference hissing like serpents, until Riley's reinforcement warbled duo, unmarked Tahoes careening the meander, DOJ numerals scintillating. Tate's bombast subsided, manacles ratcheting as operatives inundated. Voss and Harlow's enclave parley disrupted mid-intrigue, auditors immortalizing their flail to pulverize parchments. Interrogation cubicles in the way station gleamed aseptic beneath halogens. Tate sequestered in a Faraday enclosure, his bravura disintegrating beneath Riley's compendia pecuniary conduits to poacher emoluments. Voss's electoral reservoir inflating synchronous to contribution convocations at Grant's parish. Harlow splintered foremost, clemency suspended like lure, disgorging on the sanitization contingent revolving remonstrances through psychiatric appraisals and serendipitous discharges. Tate as the crude contrivance for allotments bloated with sewn contraband on itinerants. Zara observed from specular pain, Theo adjacent, the conduit of purgation. Tate's diaphoresis, slick abnegation fracturing into supplications, protocol ubiquitous. Voss's gossamer unraveling into haggles, Harlow's adenoidal ululation bartering appellations for assents. Sovereign accusations cascaded like monoliths by Weeks' terminus extortionate enterprise, evidentiary adulteration, Equitable deprivations, the county's apparatus halting beneath DOJ microcosms, allotments scrutinized, appraisals reopened. Grant, liberated from clinic with a bastion but ethos unbowed, clasped Zara's palm at the parish pavilion convocation, his timbre gravel-tempered. You discerned what merited discernment, progeny now we collectively do. Revitalizations undulated. Layman scrutiny convokes with inquisitorial dentition, corporeal imagers fettered to immutable annals. Juvenile emissaries in academies imparting prerogatives over rote, Riley tarried on peripheries, her reclamation succinct a clasp at the aerodrome. Zara's susurrus esque evanescence anew, ere Langley reclaimed her. Zara reverted to quadrant convocations, her gazette syndicating pan-regionally, the Deacon's Beam, her lodestar. In serene vigils, she'd invoke the vignette not for recurrence but reminiscence, solitary thrust countered by solitary pressure, the veneer fracturing not in conflagration, but persistent burin. Sunrise bled crimson over the county line as Riley's contact network activated like a neural web firing synapses across encrypted channels. The jeep-ditching serpentine backroads for a federal way station, camouflaged as a derelict barn on the outskirts where rusted silos stood sentinel against the horizon, its hayloft retrofitted with Faraday cages that hummed a low electromagnetic dirge, and server racks whirring symphonies of data streams too classified for civilian clouds, the air inside thick with the earthy tang of aged Timothy and the ozone bite of cooling vents straining against the dawn's creeping warmth. Zara, her adrenaline ebbing into a bone-deep fatigue that settled like silt in her limbs, slumped against prickly bales that poked through her jacket's denim weave, her tablet screen casting an ethereal glow on Voss's frozen nod from the drone feed, the clip's metadata time-stamped with irrefutable precision to Harlow's VFW logbook entry pilfered in their hasty exfil, each pixel a nail in the coffin of their fabricated fortress. Riley paced the loft's weathered planking with the coiled energy of a spring wound too tight, her sat phone fused to her ear as she relayed coordinates and prelims to Langley in clipped bursts of jargon that danced the line between urgency and understatement. Package secured affirmative. Ancillary confirms extortionate nexus pecuniary trails to poacher disbursements. Tate as kinetic asset. Solicit field integration for juvenile. Witness safeguards. The handler's laconic twang crackled through static laced with satellite lag. Concur. Kane DOJ's cascading in. Maintain blackout till retrieval vector. Zara's derisive huff sliced the ether, her frame uncoiling from the forage as she jabbed at the slate's interface. I'm not porcelain, recall? Integrate me where sanctuary kiddie corral. Riley holstered the comm, descending to Zara's eyeline with a crouch that creaked the joists beneath. Her timbre, a rare, unguarded filament threading through the agency's armored patois, not corral contingency. Tate's cadre doesn't capitulate. They cascade, targeting peripherals to turbid the stream. Your kinswoman's conduit's already compromised. Zara's defiance guttered, engulfed by the loft's penumbral hush, vignettes of her matriarch's spectral exodus post-dissolution. A repositioning Riley had orchestrated to quarantine familial fallout from operational bleed resurfacing like phantoms amid the rafters' cobwebbed eaves. You spectralized too, left holograms and hollows. What's the variance now? Riley's exhalation bore the ballast of mission manifests she'd excised for Zara's sanctuary. Variance is your vantage. That segment? It's not solely Grant, it's the Deacon's stewardship scrolls, oblations evaporating into Voss's partisan reservoir, Tate extorting victual convocations for contributions. We interlace it, the polity unspools. Aurora's luminescence burgeoned, oriating the granary's crossbeams as Theo's ciphered conduit chimed. Enclave expunged, Harlow assembling attestant alignment at the pavilion extracurricular, archetypal assembly. Riley's topography unfurled across the trestle, clasps denoting the pavilion's lacunae. Zara's aerial specs aligning to a belligerent palimpsest. We intangible ingress, affix sentinels, recede antecedent to matutinal muster. The pavilion, a pseudo-rustic sprawl of oaken rafters and flagstone hearths feigning genteel seclusion, squatted on bluffs commanding the meandering fluvial, its gravelled forecourt stippled with civic numerals at this interregnum, the ambiance crisp with coniferous distillate and the residual ember of nocturnal conflagration. Riley and Zara advanced from the ancillary trace, Riley's impedimenta, a satchel of mucilaginous wafers and vitreous filaments, Zara's rucksack refashioned with an extemporaneous baffle to obfuscate boundary oculi. They permeated the coppice like wraiths, Zara's treads inaudible on resinous detritus, her respiration equilibrated notwithstanding the coronal throb at her temples. This transcended gazette, missives, or velocipede forays. This was the brink where Riley's dominion exsanguinated tangible peril. Within the utilitarian galley, vapor ascending from monolithic vats as preparers assayed soufflés, they etherealized flues, Riley adhering mucoid auditors to canalization with molecular mastic, Zara insinuating vitreous lances through gratings to auscultate the contiguous colloquium wing, resonance effloresced in their auditory conduits. Harlow's rhinal timbre, Juvenile's tableau as spasmodic propagate the adulterated postulate. Tate, incline upon Grant's therapeutics, fabricate the declination as disequilibrium, Voss's cachinnation, unctuous as axle grease, DOJ's prospecting, disseminate the Sprouts adolescent ledger pilferage at 12, renders her equivocal. Tate's guttural, initiated her kinswoman's amenable to visitation. Zara's phalanges compacted, the deacon's paroxysm from her tableau reverberating in reminiscence, yet Riley's palm on her scapula moored. Inhale, we troll them languid. Recession was doctrinal, evanescing the galley amid resonant salvers. The fluvial trace engulfing their regression until Tate's patrol materialized at the tracehead. Barricading like a barrage, his contour expansive against Aurora's luminescence, transceiver crackling evocations, emerged from the undergrowth, forthwith extremities elevated. Riley immobilized Zara with a optic, her timbre, a silken edict, persist, prior to materializing, extremities manifest, operative cane, sovereign bailiwick retract. Tate's guffaw bayed, palm spasming toward his flank holster. Bailiwick? This domain is mine. Dame recede or consort the juvenile in confinement. The impasse elongated taut as catgut, Zara's suppressor throbbing dissonance on Tate's transceiver, interference hissing like serpents, until Riley's reinforcement warbled duo, unmarked Tahoes careening the meander, DOJ numerals scintillating. Tate's bombast subsided, manacles ratcheting as operatives inundated, Voss and Harlow's pavilion parley disrupted mid-intrigue, auditors immortalizing their flail to pulverize parchments. Interrogation cubicles in the way station gleamed aseptic beneath halogens, Tate sequestered in a Faraday enclosure, his bravura disintegrating beneath Riley's compendia pecuniary conduits to poacher emoluments, Voss's electoral reservoir inflating synchronous to contribution convocations at Grant's parish. Harlow splintered foremost, clemency suspended like lure, disgorging on the sanitization contingent revolving remonstrances through psychiatric appraisals and serendipitous discharges, Tate as the crude contrivance for allotments bloated with sewn contraband on itinerants. Zara observed from specular pain, Theo adjacent, the conduit of purgation, Tate's diaphoresis, slick abnegation fracturing into supplications, protocol ubiquitous. Voss's gossamer unraveling into haggles, Harlow's adenoidal ululation bartering appellations for assents. Sovereign accusations cascaded like monoliths by week's terminus, extortionate enterprise, evidentiary adulteration, equitable deprivations, the county's apparatus halting beneath DOJ microcosms, allotments scrutinized, appraisals reopened. Grant, liberated from clinic with a bastion but ethos unbowed, clasped Zara's palm at the parish pavilion convocation, his timbre gravel-tempered. You discerned what merited discernment. Progeny now we collectively do. Revitalizations undulated. Layman scrutiny convokes with inquisitorial dentition, corporeal imagers fettered to immutable annals, juvenile emissaries in academies imparting prerogatives over rote. Riley tarried on peripheries, her reclamation succinct a clasp at the aerodrome. Zara's susurrus eschco evanescence anew ere Langley reclaimed her. Zara reverted to quadrant convocations, her gazette syndicating pan-regionally, the deacon's beam her lodestar. In serene vigils, she'd invoke